going to take you to Kiev at the start of the week that marks the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that you'll hear from Volodymyr Zelensky and Joe Biden. We will play you their comments in a moment, but what sets this scene utterly apart today in Kiev are the pictures of the President of the United States in the Ukrainian capital, in smartly tailored black coat and aviator sunglasses, standing next to his Ukrainian counterpart against the sun-bleached backdrop of St. Michael's Cathedral with its brilliant blue and white facade and gilded domes. This was a visit of profound symbolism. The very fact that the President had made the arduous and long journey all the way to the capital, and in this significant week. To the men themselves now. First, President Zelensky, looking ahead.
We hope that this year, the 2023, will become a year of victory. This unprovoked and criminal Russia's war against Ukraine and against the whole world and democratic world has to end with liberating the whole of Ukraine's territory from Russia's occupation and the solid guarantees of the long-term security for our country as well as the Europe and the whole world.
Volodymyr Zelensky and alongside him, as I mentioned, Joe Biden. He offered words of praise and a promise of continued support.
You and all Ukrainians, Mr. President, remind the world every single day what the meaning of the word courage is. From all sectors of your economy, all walks of all life. It's astounding. Astounding. Remind us that freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes, and that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
Joe Biden in Kiev, and shortly before we came on air, we did get confirmation that he has now returned to Poland, where he flew in. It's, I think, a 10-hour train journey he took from Kiev there and back. Well, the Ukrainians are clearly grateful for all the support and the promises of support, but it's also obvious that they want much more sophisticated weaponry, longer-range weaponry, and those elusive fighter jets. On that in particular, President Biden has said no. But why has he said no? Admiral John Kirby is the US National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications.
Well, I won't have anything to add to what the president said when asked about that. I would tell you that we remain in close consultation with our Ukrainian counterparts, of course, including today between the two presidents, to talk about their long-range needs and the capabilities that they're going to require most in the weeks and months ahead. And the United States takes that responsibility very seriously. We're leading the world in terms of contributions to Ukraine's military, and we're coordinating the efforts of allies and partners to provide additional capabilities. And I think you'll see that continue.
Yeah, you are leading the world, undoubtedly, and there has been very significant aid. There has also been a pattern, which is that there's been hesitation or indeed initial refusal to supply various classes of weaponry, from armoured fighting vehicles to Abrams tanks to the Patriot missile defence system. And then it happens, but it happens belatedly. And Ukraine clearly continues to make the same argument, which is we need this now.
I might push back a little bit on the characterization that it happens belatedly or in the stair-step approach that you outlined. What we're trying to do, and we've done since the beginning of this war, is evolve the kinds of capabilities that we are providing Ukraine as the war evolves. You might remember a year ago, and it's sad to say that it's been a year of war, as the Russian forces were marching on Kyiv. What the Ukrainians needed most were Stinger anti-air missiles and Javelin anti-tank missiles, and that's what we focused on providing them, if you look back at the packages. Then in the spring, when Mr. Putin decided he was going to focus on the Donbass and down south, long-range fires, in other words, artillery or these rocket systems, were what the Ukrainians really needed, and we stepped up, as well as so many allies and partners, to do that. And now, as we get ready for what we think will be more fighting in open terrain in the spring, when the weather improves, allies and partners are coming together to help the Ukrainians do what we call combined arms warfare. This is about integrating air and ground forces in open terrain. And that's why the armored vehicles are now so important. And it's not just the United States that's meeting that need. It's the Germans, it's the British with their challenge.
Indeed, and I do want to move off F-16s and fighter jets, but may I just ask, just in a sense to get this cleared up, were a NATO ally to want to send some of their F-16s, they'd need to get your say-so on that. Is that something that you would be willing to provide?
I won't get ahead of where we are in the decision-making process in terms of specific F-16 provisions, but obviously we aren't arm-twisting nations who want to provide a certain capability that they are able to provide on their own. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, understood. The other side of this equation is that there has been striking concern expressed by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying about China and saying within the last few days that China is, in his words, considering providing lethal support to Russia in its war against Ukraine. Can you tell me what evidence there is of that?
Vice President Harris also said the same thing in her remarks on Saturday at the Munich Security Conference. And we are seeing growing indications that China might be making a change in the calculus of the kind of support that they are willing to provide Russia. Now, they might try to couch it as coming from Chinese companies, but you and I both know that there's virtually no line between the state and quote unquote private companies inside the Chinese system. I'd rather not get into too much of the details here of what we're seeing. I think you can understand that, but we are seeing some worrying indications.
Well, in that case, may I ask if you can give me any sort of detail on what, again, Mr. Blinken's words here, what the serious consequences would be for China were they to go down that path?
Well, I mean, we obviously would have tools that we could put into place.
Which are what?
I'd rather not. Yeah, I won't get into specifying them right now because we don't want to see this happen.
Yeah.
China has a choice to make. They can choose to join the rest of the world in isolating Russia and not making it easier for Russia to kill innocent Ukrainians, or if they don't, then obviously we would have to consider some potential consequences. And
I can understand that principled argument, but the point is, I mean, Richard Haas, a very seasoned senior former US diplomat, was just saying today that the problem is it's just all too plausible that it's very difficult to see a downside for China, very difficult to see what the US could do about it, and your sort of refusal, understandable up to a point not to specify, only really underlines that.
It's not a refusal. I think it's we've made it clear to the Chinese privately and publicly that there would be consequences. They have to make this choice whether they want to go down this lane or not. It wouldn't just be the United States that would likely respond. There could very well be up.
This week of the anniversary of the start of the major land war, the precise date will be hit on Friday. It's not just freighted with significance for Ukraine, but also for Russia. For the last 6 months, Russian forces have been trying to capture the eastern city of Bakhmut, and they're now pushing for victory before Friday. Our senior international correspondent Orla Guerin reports from the outskirts of the city.
The battle for Bakhmut is now at close quarters, inside the city and on the outskirts. Ukrainian troops are still defending every inch. But the enemy is closing in. It's hellish, according to President Zelensky, who says Bakhmut must be defended, but not at any cost.
Плюс, кінець зв'язку. Приціл менше 5 був? Да.
The snow is coming down now. We're at a concealed position on the outskirts of Bakhmut, just hearing some more shelling there. We're with troops from the 28th Brigade. They're part of the defence of the city, and Bakhmut is still in Ukrainian hands. The Russians have been stepping up their attacks. They have gained some ground. But the mortar team we are with are fighting on, targeting enemy positions 2 kilometres away. I'm with Victor, one of the troops here. He ran a shoe business before the war. He has a wife and 2 children, one of them a baby, just 18 months old. And he hasn't seen them since the war began. He's been fighting since the very start. And are you worried the baby doesn't remember you?
Yes, he don't remember me. When I went to the war, he was so little. He don't understand about nothing. Yes, when I speak in the Viber to telephone and video conversation, he don't know who I am. We want war is finished yesterday. When will be it, we don't know.
We're in the corridor of a busy hospital, we can't say where, and military casualties are being brought in. In the space of just a few minutes, we saw 3 ambulances arriving outside. There were 2 heavily wounded soldiers, both stretcher cases, carried out with drips in their arms. And there were 2 walking wounded. There's a constant stream of medics coming in and out. The floor is covered in mud. There's been so much traffic, so many boots coming from the battlefield. Doctor, could I ask you, first of all, are you happy to tell me your name?
My name is Miroslav.
It's almost a year now since the invasion happened and Ukraine came under attack. Did you imagine it would last this long? Did you ever think the fighting would still be like this a year on?
Я думав, що це буде продовжуватися довго.
I thought it would last a long time, he says, because the country we are fighting wants to destroy us, using all its strength,
Знищити нас.
and that country doesn't have any way back.
Немає якогось ходу назад.
Just come along the corridor here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 wounded men on stretchers. They're covered in foil blankets to keep them warm and to protect against shock. One still has his boots on, they're caked in mud. Seeing the steady stream of casualties being brought in here, you get a sense of what this fight is costing Ukraine, of the price this country is paying to defend its territory.
The BBC's Orla Guerin reporting from the outskirts of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. You're listening to NewsHour. Coming up on the programme, Germany has taken in 1 million Ukrainian refugees since last February. But is the welcome wearing thin? We hear from a priest who's seen the mood in Germany change.
In the beginning, there was an enormous engagement of many people who wanted to help. Currently, we receive roughly 95% less than in the earlier months. They're getting more and more cautious to spend the money they might well need for themselves.
We'll also be hearing from soldiers on exercise in Estonia and glassblowers in Italy, all talking about Ukraine 1 year on. That's in 20 minutes here on NewsHour. Our headline this hour, what we started the programme with, President Biden has promised to back Ukraine for as long as it takes on a landmark visit to Kiev ahead of the anniversary of Russia's invasion. This is NewsHour. It's live from the BBC in London. I'm Tim Franks. Douglas Latchford was an art dealer, but he was also an art smuggler. And now an astonishing hoard of his has come to light in London, a vast trove of royal jewellery from Cambodia's medieval Angkorian Empire. Cambodian experts say they've never seen most of the jewellery before and are stunned by its very existence. The loot's now flown from the UK to Cambodia. It's set to go on public display later this year. Before the collection left London, Celia Hatton was given a preview.
We're entering a top-secret compound in South London.
I think this is sort of what walking into a prison feels like.
It's holding long-lost treasures originally stolen from the Cambodian temples of Angkor Wat. Eventually, we enter a small, brightly lit room. Inside, Cambodia's Angkorian crown jewelry. Thousands of years of priceless history. It was looted and then hidden away in London for decades.
You can see the gold really sparkling.
Now it's been rediscovered.
We can see a row of crowns, 1, 2, 5 crowns, and then this beautiful gold cup. To think that this is solid gold dating back to the 11th century.
Hold on. You also have the gray black.
Many of these pieces were stolen in modern times, taken during the country's 3 decades of civil war that began in the 1970s. They were funneled into a secret collection belonging to the British dealer and known art smuggler Douglas Latchford. He died in 2020 while awaiting trial in the US.
I have heard a lot about how rich Cambodia was in the past.
The reappearance of the Angkorian jewelry is a revelation for Cambodian experts. Archaeologist Sonetra Sung examines a chunky gold necklace. The same jewelry appears on the walls of Angkor Wat.
This is might be a piece from a crown.
She's completed an entire graduate degree in Angkorian jewelry only by studying temple carvings. Now, for the first time, she's holding the real thing.
Still, I could not believe it, and especially it's from one single collection.
It's still a mystery how these artifacts ended up for sale in the UK. In an industrial area of North London, I meet Brad Gordon, an American lawyer who's the head of Cambodia's investigations team.
Where to begin? All right.
He first saw the jewelry last summer.
I was driven by a representative of the Latchford family to an undisclosed location.
Latchford's family promised to return his stolen collection to Cambodia after he died. The authorities didn't know what they'd receive. They certainly didn't expect it to be handed over in a parking lot.
I was shown the back of the vehicle. Inside were 4 boxes of Cambodia's greatest treasures, gold of the Angkorian kings and queens. I felt like crying.
Some of the jewelry has surfaced before. Latchford included a handful of it in a book he co-wrote in 2008. Even after he was formally accused of dealing in stolen antiquities by the US, he maintained his innocence.
They've seen too many Indiana Jones films.
Here he is in a rare interview in 2004.
As far as I know, there is no such thing as a smuggling network, and I certainly don't belong to any smuggling network.
Last year, our team traveled to Cambodia and met former looters who are now government witnesses. They told us they stole items for Latchford, which he and his network then sold on to private collections and UK institutions like the British Museum and the V&A.
I believe this is the greatest art crime in history. This went on for decades.
We asked the Met Police if Latchford's UK associates are also being investigated. They declined to comment, noting they don't identify anyone under investigation prior to being charged with a criminal offence.
So in a very careful process, a headdress has been unpacked from a box.
Since we saw the collection in London, it's been flown back to Phnom Penh in a top-secret mission, where it's been welcomed by Cambodia's authoritarian leader, Hun Sen. He's facing another election this year and could paint this as a political win.
This is Angkor. So this is on the walls of Angkor Wat. Now we're looking at what could be the real-life object.
Politics aside, Cambodians want their antiquities returned. After decades in the dark, the jewelry will soon be on display and in the spotlight once again.
And that was Celia Hatton reporting. Earlier this month, the Church of England's National Assembly voted to keep its ban on conducting same-sex weddings, but did approve allowing priests to bless same-sex couples. Today, a group of Anglican church leaders from Africa, Asia and Latin America have issued a strongly worded condemnation of that decision, saying they no longer recognise the head of the Church of England, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, as their leader. Tim Wyatt is a reporter at the newspaper The Church Times.
They've basically put out a statement saying that they kind of no longer have any confidence or trust in the kind of historic structure of the Anglican Communion, which historically has seen the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Church of England as the kind of mother church, first among equals, and this kind of family of interdependent denominations. And so they're saying what they want to do is recast the structure of the institution around some kind of fresh leadership, probably from one of their own number, as they no longer really want to follow Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as the leading figure of global Anglicanism.
Right. So they're clearly expressing their upset with Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, but they are not, I mean, this is not a formal, we no longer consider ourselves to be Anglicans.
No, not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. They are very keen to say that they are the mainstream Anglicanism worldwide. They insist, though it's hard to know whether this is accurate, that they represent about 75% of actual Anglican worshippers worldwide. And it's certainly true that these churches from the so-called global south are greater in number than in the Church of England. So they argue that they are holding firm to the kind of traditional tenets of Anglicanism, and it is Justin Welby and the Church of England which has departed by its plan to bless some same-sex relationships. So very much not a schism. They want to stay in the structure. Really, it's almost more of a takeover. They want to grab the reins of control themselves and no longer have to submit in some senses to what they see as liberalizing, almost heretical Western denominations like the Church of England.
But just to be crystal clear about this, they obviously say that we feel that we've got the moral right to say this, and they also say that they've got the weight of numbers. But just formally, I mean, there's no way they can oust the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Church of England from its primary role, can they?
Not kind of structurally, no. There's no kind of trigger ballot or vote that they could call. The Anglican Communion doesn't really work like that. It's much more ambiguous and vague. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury is just one of kind of four kind of loose centres of unity. But it's interesting that at a recent Anglican summit just last week, Justin Welby himself said that he didn't want to force anyone to sign up to things that they couldn't kind of abide in their conscience. And so he was effectively opening up, saying, if you want to have a conversation about whether you move on from the Archbishop of Canterbury as always being this first among equals, then I'm open to that. So it remains to be seen how he will respond to this kind of latest salvo, but there might be space consensually to arrange some kind of new settlement.
Is this a major moment, do you think?
I think this is quite a major moment. It's clear that perhaps more than they expected in the Church of England, the conservative archbishops across the global south have been really feel very betrayed and upset by the decision the Church of England has taken. And I think this latest statement is by far the strongest word of rebuke and the clearest statement of their intent.
And that was Tim Wyatt, reporter at the newspaper The Church Times. You're listening to NewsHour. Much more to come in the next 30 minutes. Welcome back to NewsHour. More than 100 laws have been introduced in Russia to prevent people opposing the war in Ukraine or even calling it a war. Anyone who does speak out risks their own freedom and potentially their families. A BBC World Service investigation has been hearing from Russians who have taken the risk over the past year to oppose the war. Nawal Al-Maghafi has this report.
On the 22nd of March last year, at a routine council meeting in the city of Voronezh in southwest Russia, something very rare happened. Councillor Nina Belevia openly criticized Vladimir Putin.
I am against the decision taken by the President of the Russian Federation and against the actions that are being carried out today on the territory of the sovereign state of Ukraine. I consider what's going on to be a war crime.
In footage from the meeting, Ms. Belevia can be seen standing at the lectern, ignoring angry calls from colleagues for her to stop filming on her phone. Why doesn't she shut her mouth, shouts one. She carries on regardless.
There is no real evidence that Ukraine was preparing to attack our country. None, none, none. There is no such proof, only unfounded statements.
She was speaking less than a month after the start of the invasion. But new laws had already been introduced, making it a crime to call it a war or to demonstrate against it. Nina took a big risk in speaking out. And she wasn't the only one.
We got together and we realized that we cannot and we will not remain silent.
In Ekaterinburg, 24-year-old Leonia and his friends have been using street art to protest against the war. His desk is littered with paintbrushes, pens and drawing paper, on which he sketches out their latest design. It features the Z symbol, widely used in state propaganda supporting the war. But here, it's painted on top of a Russian phrase signifying the death of soldiers. The new design is printed onto hundreds of stickers, which they then put up all around town. Dima, another member of the group, told us that guerrilla tactics were the best way for them to voice opposition to the war after police crackdowns on public protests.
I don't see the point in going to the square to shout no to war. I'll end up in jail for 3 days. This is our attempt to say publicly what cannot.
But after a couple of weeks, Lyonya was caught by the police with a backpack full of the stickers.
They took me to the police station. I said, I want my lawyer. I get a good smack in the face for that. I'm like, I don't understand. I need a lawyer. I get the same again.
After video of Nina's speech at the council meeting went viral, she knew it wasn't safe for her to stay in Russia any longer. Hundreds of thousands are estimated to have fled the country since the start of the war. Facing multiple charges, she decided to join them.
It was Nawal Al-Maghafi reporting. To state the blindingly obvious, the war in Ukraine is being fought most fiercely and in the most costly way on Ukrainian territory. Russian invader pitched against Ukrainian defender. But as President Biden's visit to Kyiv today was meant to underline, many countries in the West are trying to support Ukraine's war effort. That's being done with arms supplies and also with sanctions. We'll talk about the effectiveness of those in a moment with the European Union envoy on sanctions. What's the mood, though, across the continent? As the conflict is about to enter its second year and with no indication of it ending any time soon, our Europe editor Katya Adler reports that there are signs in parts of Europe that the collective resolve is beginning to fray.